A simple elderly woman denied a first-class seat, unaware her rich son owns the airline. The December chill permeated the walls of Boston Logan International Airport, despite the constant flow of warm air from the vents overhead. Martha Wilson, a 72-year-old woman with silver hair neatly pinned into a bun, clutched her worn leather handbag as she approached the check-in counter of Atlantic Airways. Her knuckles were slightly swollen from arthritis, but she maintained a gentle dignity in her movements. "Good morning," Martha said, her voice soft but clear. "I have a ticket to San Francisco." She slid her confirmation printout across the counter along with her driver's license. The check-in agent, a young woman with a tight ponytail and a name tag that read Brenda, scanned the documents with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Wilson, I see you've booked an economy seat. Your flight boards in 2 hours at gate C12, Brenda said, tapping at her keyboard. Martha hesitated, her weathered hands trembling slightly as she reached for her wallet. "Actually, I was wondering if I could upgrade to first class. My hip has been giving me trouble lately, and the extra space would help." She pulled out a small envelope containing several $100 bills she'd been saving for months. "I know it costs more, but I've been putting aside some money for this trip." Brenda glanced at the cash and then at her screen. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilson, but first class is completely booked for this flight. There's nothing available." Her tone was professionally detached, but her eyes didn't meet Martha's. Behind Martha, a businessman in an expensive suit cleared his throat impatiently. Martha nodded in understanding and gathered her things, moving aside to let the man approach the counter. "Good morning, Mr. Davenport." Brenda's tone shifted to one of enthusiastic recognition. "We have your first-class seat ready. Would you like your usual pre-flight amenities?" Martha pretended not to notice as she slowly walked away, her rolling suitcase wobbling slightly on its worn wheels. She found a seat by the large windows overlooking the tarmac and took a moment to rest. From her purse, she pulled out a small framed photograph of a young man in a graduation cap and gown, his smile bright and full of promise. "I'm finally going to see you, Michael," she whispered to the photo. "It's been too long." Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Michael Wilson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, overlooking the bay. At 45, he had the confident posture of a man who had built an empire from the economy cabin of Flight AA317, hummed with the white noise of conversations and the shuffling of passengers settling into their seats. Martha sat in 32B, a middle seat wedged between a heavy-set man already spilling over the armrest and a teenager with headphones blasting music loud enough for her to hear every beat. She winced as she tried to find a comfortable position for her hip. The arthritis had worsened in the past year, but her Medicare didn't cover the treatments her doctor recommended. She'd chosen to save that money for this trip instead. "Can I get you anything to drink once we're in the air?" a flight attendant asked, barely making eye contact as she rushed through the pre-flight checks. "Just water, please," Martha replied, though the attendant had already moved on to the next row. Martha closed her eyes and thought about the last time she had spoken to Michael. It was at his wife Jennifer's funeral 7 years ago. The cancer had taken Jennifer quickly, leaving Michael with their 5-year-old daughter, Lily. Martha had offered to move to San Francisco to help raise her granddaughter, but Michael had shut down, burying himself in work and hiring a nanny instead. "He was always so independent," Martha whispered to herself. Even as a little boy, the memory of Michael's childhood brought a smile to her face. After his father died when he was just 8, it had been just the two of them. Martha had worked double shifts at the diner to put food on the table, and later to help pay for his college education. Michael had been brilliant, earning scholarships that took him to Stanford University, where he studied computer science and business. Meanwhile, in the first-class cabin, James Davenport swirled his complimentary pre-takeoff champagne. Through the partition, he caught a glimpse of Martha struggling to store her small carry-on in the overhead bin. For a moment, he considered offering his seat to her. It would be the decent thing to do, but the thought passed quickly as the flight attendant refilled his glass. In San Francisco, Michael sat at the head of a long conference table, surrounded by executives and lawyers. The acquisition of Atlantic Airways was nearly complete, a strategic move that would expand his tech company's logistics capabilities. The airline's customer service ratings have been slipping, noted CFO Richard Parker, sliding a report across the table. They've been cutting corners to maximize profits. Michael frowned. That stops today. I want a full audit of their customer experience protocols. If we're putting our name on this airline, it will reflect our values. Board member Victoria Chen raised an eyebrow. That will cut into initial profits significantly. Some things are more important than short-term gains, Michael replied firmly. My mother taught me that good business means treating people right. The irony of invoking his mother's wisdom while having barely spoken to her in years wasn't lost on him, but he pushed the thought aside. As the meeting adjourned, Michael found himself staring at his phone, at the last text message from his mother. Thinking of you and Lily today. Love always. Mom. It was sent 3 months ago, on Jennifer's death anniversary. He hadn't replied. A notification popped up on his screen, a reminder that his daughter had a piano recital that evening. Michael sighed, knowing he would likely miss it again. Lily was 12 now, growing up without really knowing her grandmother, just as she had grown up without her mother. Back on the plane, Martha's seatmate accidentally knocked over her cup of water, soaking the photograph she had been holding. She quickly dabbed at it with a tissue, her heart racing as the image began to blur. I'm so sorry, the man apologized profusely. It's all right, Martha assured him, though her voice trembled. I have others. But she didn't, not really. Most of her photographs had been lost in a small apartment fire 2 years ago. This damaged picture and her memories were all she had left of a son who had become a stranger. As the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, Martha closed her eyes and tried to imagine what Lily looked like now. She had only ever seen her granddaughter in the handful of photos Michael had sent over the years. The last one showed a gap-toothed 7-year-old with her father's determined chin and her mother's gentle eyes. Martha hadn't told Michael she was coming. After years of unanswered calls and brief text responses, she had finally decided to take matters into her own hands. Her recent health scare, a minor heart attack that had frightened her more than she cared to admit, had made her realize that life was too short to wait for reconciliation to come to her. So she had scraped together her savings, bought a plane ticket, and was now headed to San Francisco with nothing but an address she'd gotten from an old Christmas card and the hope that some bonds were too strong to be permanently broken. The California sunshine felt different from Boston's, warmer, more golden somehow. Martha squinted as she exited the airport, pulling her lightweight jacket around her shoulders despite the mild temperature. She had forgotten how beautiful San Francisco could be, with its hills rising and falling like waves across the cityscape. After gathering her courage, she hailed a taxi and gave the driver an address in Pacific Heights, an upscale neighborhood she remembered from Michael's rare descriptions of his life. The fare would be expensive, but she had been saving for this moment for too long to hesitate now. As the taxi wound through the city streets, Martha gazed out at the iconic Golden Gate Bridge in the distance. The last time she had seen it was 20 years ago, when she had visited Michael after his graduation from Stanford. He had been so proud to show her around, to prove that her sacrifices had been worthwhile. First time in San Francisco? The taxi driver asked, catching her eye in the rearview mirror. No, it's been many years, Martha replied. My son lives here. Lucky you. Beautiful city to visit family in. Martha nodded, not trusting herself to speak further. The taxi turned onto a tree-lined street where elegant homes stood behind manicured gardens. The driver slowed down as they approached a large modern house with a sleek exterior of glass and steel. "This is it," he announced, pulling up to the curb. Martha stared at the imposing structure. It looked more like a museum than a home. Nothing like the warm, cluttered apartment where she had raised Michael. She paid the driver and slowly approached the front gate, her heart pounding. A security intercom stood beside the entrance. Martha pressed the button with a trembling finger. "Wilson Residence," answered a crisp, unfamiliar voice. "Hello," Martha said, her voice small. "I'm Martha Wilson, Michael's mother." There was a pause before the voice responded. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson isn't expecting any visitors today." "I know, Martha hesitated. "I wanted to surprise him, and to see my granddaughter, Lily." Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Wilson is at the office, and Miss Lily is at her piano lesson. Perhaps you should call to make an appointment." Appointment. The word stung Martha like a physical blow. She needed an appointment to see her own son and granddaughter. "Oh, could you tell me when they might be home?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Wilson generally returns around 8 in the evening, though he has a dinner meeting tonight. Miss Lily will be home at 5 with her nanny." Martha thanked the voice and stepped back from the gate. It was just past noon. She had hours to wait, and nowhere to go. Across the street was a small park with benches overlooking the bay. She made her way there and sat down, setting her suitcase beside her. Meanwhile, Michael was in the middle of another meeting, this one about the rebranding of Atlantic Airways under his company's umbrella. His phone vibrated with a message from the house security system. "Unknown visitor. Martha Wilson." His breath caught in his throat. His mother was here? In San Francisco? At his house? Michael excused himself from the meeting and stepped into the hallway to call home. "Mrs. Reynolds?" he addressed the housekeeper. "Was that really my mother at the gate?" "An elderly woman who claimed to be your mother," Mrs. Reynolds replied cautiously. "I didn't recognize her from photographs, so I followed protocol for unscheduled visitors." Michael ran a hand through his hair. "What did she say? Where did she go?" "She asked when you and Miss Lily would be home. Last I saw, she was heading to the park across the street." Michael ended the call and leaned against the wall, conflicting emotions washing over him. He hadn't seen his mother in 7 years, hadn't spoken to her on the phone in nearly 3. Their relationship had deteriorated after Jennifer's death, when Martha had offered to move in to help with Lily. Something about the offer had triggered Michael's deepest insecurities, the fear that he couldn't manage on his own, that he wasn't enough for his daughter. Rather than admit these fears, he had pushed his mother away, telling her that they were fine, that they didn't need her help. Pride and grief had formed an impenetrable wall between them, and now she was here, sitting in a park across from his house. In the park, Martha watched a group of children playing. One little girl with dark hair reminded her of how she imagined Lily might look now. She wondered if her granddaughter still played with dolls, or if she had moved on to more grown-up interests. She wondered if Lily even remembered her. A young mother sat down on the bench beside Martha, struggling to manage a stroller and a fussy toddler. "Here, let me help," Martha offered, steadying the stroller while the woman situated her child. "Thank you," the woman sighed gratefully. "Some days it feels impossible to do anything with 2 hands." Martha smiled. "I remember those days. My son was quite the handful when he was little." "Do you live in the neighborhood?" the woman asked. "No, I'm visiting my son and granddaughter," Martha replied, gesturing vaguely toward the row of houses. "It's been a while since I've seen them." The woman nodded understandingly. Family can be complicated." "Yes," Martha agreed softly, especially when there's been hurt on both sides. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes before the toddler began to fuss again, and the young mother prepared to leave. "Good luck with your family visit," she said as she stood. "Sometimes just showing up is the hardest part. And the most important." Martha watched her go, hoping she was right. The afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the park. Martha had spent hours on the bench, occasionally walking around to ease the stiffness in her joints. She had considered finding a hotel, dropping off her suitcase at least, but something kept her tethered to this spot, so close to Michael and Lily, yet still so far. At 4:30, a sleek black car pulled up in front of Michael's house. Martha watched as a girl with long dark hair emerged, followed by an older woman who must be the nanny. The girl skipped up to the gate, punched in a code, and disappeared inside without ever glancing toward the park. Lily. That had to be Lily. Martha's heart ached with longing. Her granddaughter had grown so much, was becoming a young woman before her eyes, and Martha had missed it all. She gathered her courage and her suitcase and crossed the street once more. This time when she pressed the intercom button, a young voice answered, "Wilson Residence." "Lily!" Martha's voice caught in her throat. "Lily, it's your grandmother, Grandma Martha." Silence followed, then the sound of muffled conversation. Finally, the nanny's voice came through the speaker. "I'm sorry, but Miss Lily isn't authorized to let visitors in without her father's permission." "Please," Martha said, her desperation seeping through. "I've come all the way from Boston. I just want to see her." More muffled conversation. And then the gate buzzed open, much to Martha's surprise. She hurried through before anyone could change their mind. The front door opened as she approached, revealing a tall, stern-looking woman in her 50s, and, partially hidden behind her, Lily. "Mrs. Wilson," the nanny acknowledged with a nod. "I'm Ms. Patel. Mr. Wilson has been informed of your arrival." Martha barely heard her, her attention focused entirely on her granddaughter. "Lily," she breathed. "Oh, how you've grown." Lily stepped forward cautiously, studying Martha with curious eyes. "You look different from your pictures," she said finally. Martha smiled sadly. "Well, the pictures your father has are quite old now." Ms. Patel cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should continue this inside?" Mrs. Wilson must be tired from her journey. Once inside, Martha was struck by the contrast between the house's imposing exterior and its surprisingly warm interior. Family photographs lined the hallway, many of Lily at various ages, some with Michael, and a prominent one of Jennifer. Martha was relieved to see her daughter-in-law hadn't been erased from their lives. "Would you like some tea, Mrs. Wilson?" Ms. Patel offered, leading them to a spacious kitchen. "Dinner, that would be lovely. Thank you," Martha replied, settling onto a stool at the kitchen island. Lily took a seat opposite her, still watching her with those observant eyes. "Dad said you might be coming soon," Lily said, surprising Martha. "He did?" "Well, not exactly," Lily admitted, "but he's been looking at old photo albums lately, the ones with you in them. And last week, he said we should visit Boston sometime." Martha's heart swelled with hope. "I would love that. Why didn't you call first?" Lily asked bluntly. The question caught Martha off guard. She considered how to answer. "I was afraid your father might tell me not to come." Lily nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her. "Dad's afraid of getting hurt again. That's what Dr. Reynolds says." "Dr. Reynolds?" "My therapist," Lily explained matter-of-factly. "I've been seeing her since Mom died. Dad sees her too, but he doesn't know I know that." Martha was struck by the girl's perception and openness. Before she could respond, Miss Patel returned with tea and cookies. "Miss Lily has piano practice in 30 minutes," she reminded them. "And your father will be home late tonight, remember?" Lily sighed dramatically. He's always home late. A pang of recognition shot through Martha. How many times had Michael said similar words about his own father before he died? History had a way of repeating itself, even when we tried to write new chapters. Across town, Michael sat in his office, staring at his phone. Mrs. Reynolds had texted that his mother was now inside the house, talking with Lily. He should be there. He knew he should be there. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to leave. What would he say to her after all these years? How could he explain why he had kept her at arm's length? The truth, that seeing her reminded him too much of his own failings, of the ways he wasn't living up to the values she had taught him, seemed impossible to articulate. His assistant knocked on the door. "Your dinner meeting with the Atlantic Airways executives is in 45 minutes, Mr. Wilson." Michael made a sudden decision. Cancel it. Family emergency. He grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator. It was time to go home and face the past he'd been running from for 7 years. The grand piano in the Wilson home's music room gleamed under soft, recessed lighting as Lily's fingers danced across the keys. Martha sat on a nearby sofa, entranced by her granddaughter's talent. The piece, Debussy's Clair de Lune, filled the room with its haunting beauty. "Jennifer played piano, too," Martha said softly when Lily finished. "Your father never told me you had inherited her gift." Lily beamed at the comparison to her mother. "Dad had all her sheet music bound into books for me. Sometimes, when I play her favorite pieces, he sits in that chair and closes his eyes. I think he can see her then." Martha's throat tightened with emotion. She had misjudged Michael's silence over the years, assuming it meant he had moved on too quickly from Jennifer's death. But the evidence of his grief was all around her, preserved in music books, in photographs, in the way this house felt like a shrine to memories. The front door opened and closed somewhere in the distance. Footsteps approached the music room. Martha stood, smoothing her simple dress, her heart pounding. And then he was there. Michael, her son. He looked older than she had expected, with strands of gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 7 years ago. He wore an expensive suit that seemed at odds with his uncertain expression. "Mom," he said, the word hanging in the air between them. "Michael." Martha took a step forward but stopped, unsure of her welcome. Lily looked between them, sensing the tension. "Oh, I'll go practice my scales in my room," she said, slipping past her father with a supportive squeeze of his arm. When they were alone, Michael gestured awkwardly to the sofa. "Please, sit. You must be tired." Martha sat, and Michael took a chair across from her. Silence stretched between them, years of unspoken words creating an almost physical barrier. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" Michael finally asked. "Would you have said yes if I had?" Martha countered gently. Michael's gaze dropped to his hands. "I don't know." Another silence, shorter this time. "You look well," Michael offered. "The house in Boston—" "I don't live there anymore," Martha interrupted. "There was a fire 2 years ago. Nothing serious, but enough damage that I decided to move to a smaller apartment." Michael's head snapped up. "A fire? Why didn't you tell me?" The hurt in his voice surprised Martha. "You were busy with your company expansion. It was in the news. Part of me thought you might have seen it, and—" She trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought, "and chosen not to call." "I had no idea," Michael said, his voice hollow. "I've been so caught up in my own world, the company, raising Lily alone." He ran a hand through his hair in a gesture so familiar it made Martha's heart ache. "That's no excuse, though, is it?" We both could have tried harder, Martha acknowledged. After Jennifer died, I think I pushed too hard, tried to insert myself into your grief in ways that weren't helpful. Michael shook his head. You were just trying to help. I was the one who shut you out. I couldn't bear to see the disappointment in your eyes. Disappointment. Martha was genuinely confused. Michael, I have never been disappointed in you. Not in my success. Maybe, he said with a bitter smile, but in the man I became to achieve it. The corners I cut, the relationships I sacrificed, including ours. He looked up at her, vulnerability written across his face. You raised me with such clear values. Mom, work hard, be honest, treat people with respect. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of those things. Martha moved to sit beside him, tentatively taking his hand. No one is perfect, Michael. Not even me. Do you know why I really came here? He shook his head. I had a minor heart attack 3 months ago, she said softly. Michael's face paled. What? Why didn't you call me? The same reason you didn't call me about so many things, Martha replied without accusation. We got used to handling our struggles alone, but it made me realize that life is too short for pride and misunderstandings. I needed to see you and Lily before... She didn't finish the sentence. Michael clutched her hand tighter. You're okay now. I'm getting there. The doctors say if I take care of myself, I have plenty of good years ahead. She smiled reassuringly. But it was the wake-up call I needed to get on that plane. Michael's phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. With an apologetic glance, he checked the screen. It's work. The Atlantic Airways acquisition. Go ahead, Martha urged. I'll be here when you're done. Michael hesitated, then answered the call. This is Wilson. Yes, I understand the stockholders are concerned. No, I won't compromise on the customer service overhaul. Martha watched him, hearing echoes of the determined boy she had raised. Actually, Michael continued, his gaze fixed on his mother, I want to add something to the reform package. A new senior discount program with priority seating for elderly passengers or those with medical needs. He paused, listening. Yes, even in first class when available. It's non-negotiable. When he hung up, Martha raised an eyebrow. Senior discount programs. That doesn't sound like shrewd business. Michael smiled, his first genuine smile since arriving. Maybe I'm remembering what's really important. Besides, he added with a hint of his old confidence, treating people right is good business in the long run, something my mother taught me. From the doorway came the sound of a delicate throat clearing. Lily stood there, her expression hopeful. Does this mean Grandma is staying for dinner? Michael looked at Martha questioningly. I'd like that very much, Martha replied, if you'll have me. Not just for dinner, Michael said decisively. The guest room is yours for as long as you want it. We have a lot of catching up to do. He turned to Lily. How would you feel about Grandma staying with us for a while? Lily's face lit up. Oh, can you teach me to make those cookies Dad always talks about? The ones with the cinnamon? Martha laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. Snickerdoodles? Of course. Your father used to help me bake them every Sunday. I remember, Michael said softly. Maybe we could start that tradition again. Outside, the sun set over San Francisco Bay, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Inside the Wilson home, a family began the delicate work of rebuilding bridges that had nearly crumbled under the weight of time and misunderstanding. 3 months later, Martha stood at the check-in counter of Atlantic Airways at San Francisco International Airport. Michael and Lily beside her. The boarding pass in her hand read, First Class. Are you sure about this? Martha asked, looking up at her son. Seat, first class seems so extravagant. Michael smiled, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Positive. Besides, It's not extravagance when the airline CEO's mother is flying. The past 3 months had transformed all their lives. Martha had extended her stay, moving into the guest room that had gradually filled with her personal touches, knitted throws, framed photographs, and jars of homemade cookies. Her health had improved with regular checkups at the specialists Michael had insisted on, and her presence had brought a warmth to the house that had been missing for years. For Lily, having her grandmother present meant more than just someone to bake cookies with. It meant having a connection to her mother's memory through stories that Martha shared about Jennifer, and a steadying influence when Michael's work occasionally pulled him away. And for Michael, his mother's presence had been the catalyst for profound changes, both personal and professional. The Atlantic Airways acquisition had proceeded, but with his newfound commitment to the values Martha had instilled in him. The airline now boasted the industry's most generous accommodation policies for elderly and disabled passengers, and customer satisfaction ratings had soared. More importantly, he had begun leaving the office at reasonable hours 3 days a week to have dinner with his family. Wednesday nights were now sacred. No phones, no work calls, just the 3 of them around the table, talking about their days. "Your boarding will begin in about 40 minutes, the check-in agent informed them. "You're welcome to use the first-class lounge while you wait, Mrs. Wilson." Martha shook her head with a smile. "I think I'd rather stay out here with my family until it's time." They found seats near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac. Lily had insisted on coming to the airport despite it being a school day, unwilling to say goodbye to her grandmother without seeing her off properly. "It's only for 2 weeks," Martha reminded her granddaughter, who was uncharacteristically quiet. "Just long enough to pack up my apartment and arrange for the rest of my things to be shipped." "And then you'll come back?" Lily asked, seeking reassurance despite having heard the plan numerous times. "And then I'll come back," Martha confirmed. For good this time. The decision hadn't been made lightly. Martha valued her independence, but the pull of family, of being present for Lily's growing up years and rebuilding her relationship with her son, had proven stronger. The carriage house behind Michael's home was being converted into a private apartment for her, a space that would give her autonomy while keeping her close to the people she loved most. "I've been thinking," Michael said, breaking into her thoughts. "Maybe we could all fly back to Boston together. Lily's spring break starts this Friday. We could help you pack, and I could show Lily where I grew up." Martha's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? You'd want to do that?" "I think it's important," Michael replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "For Lily to know where she comes from, and for me to remember." Martha felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "I'd like that very much." An announcement came over the PA system. Pre-boarding for Atlantic Airways Flight 227 to Boston will begin shortly at Gate B12. First-class passengers and those needing special assistance are welcome to board at this time. Michael stood. "That's you, Mom. Ready?" Martha nodded, gathering her handbag. She hugged Lily tightly, then turned to Michael. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for the ticket, but for letting me back into your lives." Michael's eyes glistened. "Thank you for not giving up on us, even when I made it so difficult." He embraced her, no longer the distant CEO, but the son who had once crawled into her lap for comfort after nightmares. As Martha walked toward the gate, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. Not just the flight from Boston 3 months ago, but the longer journey of their lives. The path hadn't been straight or easy. There had been detours and wrong turns, moments when the distance between them had seemed insurmountable. But some bonds were too strong to break permanently. Some relationships, like the one between a mother and her child, could withstand long silences and find their way back to connection. Martha handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, who smiled and said, "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Wilson. We're honored to have you flying with us today." As she walked down the jetway, Martha thought about the frightened woman who had sat in economy class 3 months ago, clutching a water-damaged photograph and hoping for reconciliation. She couldn't have imagined then how completely her life would change, how fully her family would be restored to her. The first-class flight attendant greeted her warmly. "Right this way, Mrs. Wilson. Your son called ahead to make sure we took special care of you today." Martha settled into the spacious seat by the window, watching through the glass as Michael and Lily waved from inside the terminal. In 2 weeks, they would all fly back together, and a new chapter would begin. The elderly woman who had once been denied a first-class seat now held her head high, secure in the knowledge that she was valued not because her son owned an airline, but because he had rediscovered what truly mattered: the irreplaceable bonds of family and the courage to mend what had been broken. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Martha closed her eyes and said a silent prayer of gratitude. Sometimes, the longest journeys brought us right back home to the people and the love that had been waiting for us all along.